Keynote this morning. So, Carla, I believe you are there listening in. So, good morning and welcome to Australia.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that lovely introduction, and greetings from the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., this nation's capital. And I must tell you, I love that through the power of technology, I can actually see many of your smiling faces from halfway around the world. So, hello, and I see the waves, and it's wonderful, and good morning. Uh, to the ALIA Board President, Linnell Lay, and the administration and the staff, and of course, all of the librarians from across Australia who are gathered here today, it is truly my privilege to spend some time with you. And it's also a true honor to be speaking to you during your conference because it spotlights the work of librarians and the importance of promoting, as your conference theme says, truth, integrity, and knowledge. We've just printed a bag here, a carry bag, that says librarians are the original search engines. And we really feel that we are able to promote that even more now. I even have a shirt that I wear, a t-shirt that says it at the same time. And every time that I get the opportunity to be surrounded by librarians, and it energizes me so to see the excellent work that's being done, not only in the United States, but across the world. I was just reading about Australia's most recent recipient of the Teacher Librarian of the Year, Miss Jane Binner. Is she here? And you see me looking like I can really see across the world. But she is the head of the library at Kelvington Grammar School in Melbourne, the suburb of Armagh. And I was reading about her passion for spreading the joy and fun of reading. And there they've created what's called the lounge room. That's a safe, welcoming, engaging environment that encourages student input. And it goes right back to all librarians' roles of promoting collaboration and open access. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of talking with Edith Kuzwayu of South Africa. And she is the only staff member, and as she says, she's the managing librarian as well in a small library in Johannesburg. What drew her to being a librarian, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience, I know I did in my own way. Edith grew up in a household without books in a rural community where a majority of the adults could not read. She says where she lives now, 90% of the women in the village are illiterate. And she's become a passionate literacy advocate. And she was inspired by a primary school teacher who taught her to read. Now she's been praised for her tireless work all alone in this village to encourage children and young people to take up reading and enjoy books. There was one thing when Edith and I were able to talk that struck me that she said. She said that without books or access to them, a lot of information will pass you by. And that's not only the case in South Africa, but right here in the United States and across the world. Information is surrounding us, as you know, but not everyone still has access to it, whether it's because of a technological or cultural or economic divide. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household with books. However, my access after I left home was limited because of the resources of the public libraries that were in the neighborhoods and in my school. So we all know that the problem of accessibility is not new. And in the course of history, people have been deprived access to books and education for centuries. One of my favorite passages is from Alberto Manguel's book, The History of Reading. And if you've seen it, there's a chapter in it that's called Forbidden Reading. And on the cover, or the front part of that chapter, is a picture of a photograph, a rare photograph of a slave in the United States holding a book. And as he says, and I can quote it almost verbatim, as centuries of dictators, slave owners, and other illicit holders of power have always known, an illiterate crowd is the easiest to rule. And if you cannot prevent people from learning to read, the next best recourse is to limit its scope. As you can probably see, I'm a descendant of people here that were denied the right to read. African Americans in this country were once punished with lashes, finger amputations, and worse, almost death, for learning to read. And the people who taught them to read were also punished. However, Frederick Douglass, who's a noted abolitionist here, historical figure, his birthday is in this month, said he knew that reading was important as a slave when his mistress at the time, the slave owner, was severely punished and chastised by her husband for being caught teaching them to read. You can imagine now, as the first person of color in this country to have the opportunity to serve and lead the Library of Congress, what's been identified as the largest library in the world, and this country's national symbol of learning and literacy, is very humbling. It also empowers me to think about what the opportunities are for us to provide access in the digital age. And many of you, and I'd like to see you hold up your hands if anyone has ever said to you, hey, what's this about libraries in the digital age? Aren't they going out of business? Has anybody had anyone question I thought so, the viability, or why do we need libraries in this digital age? Well, once a librarian, always a librarian. I want to show you this book. It's making great headway here in the United States. It's entitled Palaces for the People. And its author, Eric Kleinenberg, writes for the newspaper, the New York Times. And he said in this, he talks about basically that in this world, this digital world, there still needs to be what's also been called the third place, a safe place in communities, a place that people can go to. And he said, to restore civil society, start with the library. He says in the book, quote, the root of the word library, libra, means both book and free. And libraries still stand and exemplify something that needs defending in this digital age. Public institutions that even in the age of automation and inequality serve as bedrocks of civil society. And what this author is doing is echoing what librarians and library customers and users have been saying for years, that libraries, whether they're on campuses and in communities, wherever they are equalizers. And this is universal. And it's a place that provides more. And someone said, Carla, sometimes when you're talking to librarians, it's like a saying that's called preaching to the choir. However, I say even choirs need to practice and learn new songs and become even more dedicated to performing and doing what they do. The free access to books and internet access. When we know that we are de facto childcare for busy parents, that we are career centers for job hunters, language instruction for immigrants, computer classes for seniors, a welcoming space for all people, whatever their backgrounds, young, old, gay, straight, rich, poor. Any person can come through the doors, visit us remotely if possible. Last, one of the surveys recently that, and I really have to go in just to give you a sense of what's happening in the United States, that a survey by the Pew Research Center said that half of all Americans over the age of 16 have used a public library in the past year. In fact, we're very proud that in this country now, there are more public libraries than the McDonald's fast food chain. We think that's a good sign. And what's more encouraging, though, is the same survey said that the millennials are more likely to have visited a public library than any other adult generation. People are coming back to libraries. People are discovering libraries. It was mentioned in my introduction that I recently was the director of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland is approximately 35 miles from where I'm sitting now, Washington, D.C., the seat of the government. It also could be characterized as being 300,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. Over half of the people in the city could be classified as functionally illiterate. In that city, the library was truly an opportunity center. When there was what has been called unrest, and that received worldwide attention, the public library in the middle of that unrest with burning cars and the neighborhood in total disarray, neighborhood young men stood in front of that public library and protected it and were there to make sure that the community had access to that library. That's more than just a place to dispense books. That place and that community still is a lifeline. And so when we are told, what do you need a library for? Everybody has access to information through a digital device. We can point to what libraries mean in communities all over this world. Libraries still represent the best of what communities can provide and offer. It represents accessibility. It represents respect for humans, whoever they are. And as an institution, I still believe, and I hope that many of you, and I think you do, know that libraries help lessen inequality and are essential to any democratic society. Those opportunity centers, how many places can you walk into where people say, what can I give you and what can I do for you? And sometimes they're not asking for anything in return. They're not asking for money. It is an institution that only gives. Now, this leads me to a opinion piece that was recently published in this country and made quite a headline in Forbes magazine this past summer. And the headline said, Amazon should replace local libraries to save taxpayers money. Think about that for a second. Well, that opinion piece was greeted with outrage, not only by the library community, but library users worldwide. The uproar was so loud that Forbes deleted and took down the article. Many of you might be in the same generational space that I am, and it wasn't long ago that our entire profession was trying to figure out internally, what was the role of libraries in the digital age? Well, that role has been strengthened, and in the digital age, from ebooks to digitizing collections online, we have become even more digital experts and go-to authoritative specialists on mining through correct and accurate information sources. We're bridging the technological divide and literacy gaps by offering digital tools and resources. Now, here at the Library of Congress, we have launched a new strategic plan to be more user centered and digitally enabled and data driven. And part of this strategic plan is a new digital strategy that harnesses, we hope, technology to bridge geographical divides, expand our reach, and enhance our services. This means we hope to throw open the library's treasure chest. The Library of Congress has been called a virtual treasure chest of information and resources. What we haven't done is really use technology as effectively as we could. And so with the new digital strategy, and I have, and want you to know, and I hope you get a chance, it's right online at our website. We have three basic things that we want to make sure that we do with technology. We will connect base first and inspire a lifelong relationship with every visit. Most of the visitors, and we have over 115 million visits to our website. Most of the visitors are coming and they're not engaging as much as we'd like to. So we'd like to have more of a relationship with them. And I'm turning it over right here. You see the pages. We want to bring the library to our users virtually. We want you in your country to be able to pull up, access in the most convenient way for you and your communities, the resources and the unique things that are here now. And we also want to make sure that we welcome other voices. Diversity and inclusion. I noticed that and was very pleased to hear the opening of this session and the respect for other cultures and other people is very evident there. And what we want to do here is in a national library, open up and expose the people here to the world. The Library of Congress already collects in over 100 languages, and half of the collection itself is in languages other than English. We want to make sure that in our national role that we are creating and helping to create and doing our part to create global citizens, that people will be able to connect with us. As the Librarian of Congress, I mentioned my talk with an interaction with Edith in South Africa. I've also been able to work with and see the work of librarians and libraries across the world and in this country, from sprawling urban library systems to small libraries. And it has been striking to participate also with these other communities. I just want to give you a sense of some of the things that are going on. I mentioned South Africa, but in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania, the libraries have what they call knowledge centers, which are special rooms made from a fabricated shipping container. And inside are computers with broadband access and research materials. In northern Greece, there's a mobile library unit that is bringing broadband internet to rural areas. And here in the United States, at the Philadelphia Free Library, they have what we are looking at even here, a culinary literacy center that's more than a cooking school, but a place for their library customers to learn math, science, and of course, reading. The San Francisco Public Library has a teen center called The Mix that includes a state-of-the-art video and sound studio where I met a homeless teenage girl who was able to find support and a safe place in that library and is now in college and able to give back to that library and volunteers in that library. And you know, in your communities and in your schools that public libraries are providing unique services tailored to their communities. Recently, I was at a library near Rochester, New York, and you can check out fishing poles. In a library in Findlay, Ohio, you can check out traffic cones. If you have a youngster that needs to learn how to drive, or you're doing construction at home, sewing machines, musical instruments, all types of things to be checked out for free to help people live their best lives. And at the New York Public Library, patrons can check out neckties, handbags, purses, and even briefcases for their job interviews. So anyone that is looking at libraries now, public libraries, school libraries, can see that librarians and libraries are responding to the needs of whatever community they're in. I've been told that you would probably not be upset if I confess that I call myself an accidental librarian. I was always at the public library in between job interviews. That was way before all of those wonderful things that you heard about. And between job interviews, when I was very politely told that I didn't have any experience after leaving school, I would wait, because I loved it, at the Central Library of the Chicago Public Library downtown. And one day, as I was waiting for yet another interview, one of the people who had just graduated with me recently, a month or two after graduation, said to me, "Oh, Carla, are you here for library jobs? They're hiring anybody with a degree." And I thought, oh, this is perfect. So I applied for a job and was assigned to a storefront branch, a small storefront branch on the south side of Chicago. And the first person I was assigned to was a blue jeaned library school student who was sitting on the floor giving story time to children with autism. And I thought, this is not what I thought libraries would be. And I knew that if I could, after watching her interact with those children who were in a very, very distressed part of that city, have their eyes light up and have them feel that way in a library, that I had just seen the power and the potential of being a librarian. And so now, in the role that I'm in now, in the position, I am even more dedicated to working with wonderful staff members here to expand our reach and to not only serve our government, but also the people that they serve. And it's a challenge. I mentioned that there's a need to make sure that we still are the authoritative source and the trusted source and the objective source for information in this digital age. And recently, we displayed one of our treasures that we have. And they are vast, the largest collection of comic books in the world, the largest collection of religious texts and Bibles, and also the founding documents of this country. And we were displaying one of those documents recently. Under guard, there were people with machine guns protecting this document, the draft of the Declaration of Independence in Thomas Jefferson's hand. And a very looking astute woman was looking at the document and noticing the guards and everything. And then she turned to me and she said, "But how do you know it's real?" One of our librarians from the Special Collections Department almost fainted, even that would be questioned. But it just brought to mind to all of us that people are searching for and need to be reassured that what they're getting is not only accurate, but maybe the best source for what they're looking for. So it may sound like what Judith said is very basic, but when she said to encourage somebody to read, you really need to give a book. You need to have the information there. And it sounds like a modest gesture, but a book or a smartphone or a laptop are rich gifts, as she said, to those who are hungry for information and access. And I understand that we have an opportunity to have question and answer. And so I'd like to open it up and interact with you. I really appreciate being able to be with you remotely, but I feel in spirit because you are, as I tell librarians all over the world, whenever I interact with the librarian, I know that I have a colleague and someone who has the same emphasis on bringing access to as many people as possible. So with that, let's open it up. And even if it's not a question, I'd like to hear from you comments. Tell me what you're doing, some of the sessions that you've been involved in. In the introduction, it was mentioned that your sessions yesterday were very inspiring. So I'd like to encourage you to share with me just some of your thoughts after hearing some of the things you heard yesterday.
Thanks, Carla. So we will take up your offer of questions and perhaps some conversation as well, because I think a lot of the topics that you've covered, the issues, would very much resonate with the people here in Australia. Certainly when you were speaking about the role of the library, promoting respect and tolerance and democracy in a society, they're all things that are certainly of interest to us and also reflect the current campaign of ALIA, Truth, Integrity and Knowledge. So there's certainly issues that we're thinking about. And I think I particularly liked your the quote you gave about acquire needs to practice. And I think that's a really good line for us to remember, that we need to continue the conversation and continue to share with people about the role of libraries. But we've got some people here with microphones. So if you'd like to put up your hand if you have a question, and if you speak it into the microphone, then Carla will be able to hear it quite clearly.
Good morning, Carla. Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege hearing you speak. I'm sure, like everybody else in the room, I'm big time fangirling at the moment. I just wanted to ask you, in the kind of US context, but also worldwide context, obviously over there in the States, it's highly politicized at the moment, a lot of division, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are in these kind of times. Is it kind of more important than ever to be neutral in the library, or is it more important than ever to not be neutral in the library?
It's more important to be neutral. What we're not neutral about is providing as many viewpoints as possible. The old saying in our profession, as you may remember, is let the books battle it out on the shelves. That it is our job to present different points of view and to let people decide for themselves what they want to consume and what they take from it. But we have to be able to withstand calls for censorship, for us to remove something that might make one group uncomfortable, and even more so now that we have to present more points of view. In this country, libraries are seen, even at the Library of Congress. When I finish here, and it might, with the time difference, I'm going to what is called the Congressional Dialogue, where members of Congress they just said no signal, darn it.
No. We can hear you, Carla.
Yeah. You can hear?
Yeah.
You see?
Yep.
I can't see you, but I'm going to keep talking.
Yep.
uh, that we're members of Congress, and as you mentioned this, it's a pretty tense time with people on different sides, and it's contentious. The Library of Congress has, for the last few years, provided an opportunity for people of Congress, both sides, independents, to come together to hear authors. Tonight is Ron Chernow, the author of Hamilton. He's going to talk about his new book about Ulysses S. Grant. David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Annette Gordon-Reed, these historians talk about and the Congress people are here without the press, they're here without staff members, they're here together talking and hearing from these historians and then asking questions just like we are now. The library, of course, we take that opportunity to bring out materials from our collections that relate to whatever the topic is. But what we've been able to tell them and make the point this last year in particular, where they have all almost universally said, this is the only place now that we can come together. It's a safe place. And we've been making the point that, sir or ma'am, this is the same thing that happens in libraries in your communities. We are that safe place. And it's been very, very helpful to drive that home to them. We are the Library of Congress. We are that for you, but we do it everywhere, and we do it all over this world. So it's even more important that we are neutral about what we present. The only time we're not neutral is when it's not correct. We wouldn't give out inaccurate information. We're not neutral about the fact that we have to present information as best we can.
Thank you, Carla. So another question, and if I can ask you to introduce yourself and just perhaps tell Carla what library you come from as well. Is that, yep. So up the front here. Anyone else so we know where to send the next microphone?
Hello, Carla. My name is Miley Joseph. I work at the State Library of New South Wales. It's been wonderful to hear from you this morning. And I was interested, because it's the International Year of Indigenous Languages, that's really important to us here in Australia. And I wondered what the Library of Congress is doing to mark this special year.
Well, I mentioned that we collect in over 100 languages, and we have materials from just about every culture that we can collect in. And we have been reaching out to the embassies here, and also we have 6 international offices that we are making sure connect as well. And we're doing more programming for people here, and that could be broadcast out as well. So we're taking that and using our collections, and some of the collections are very historic that are even not available in the country of origin. And we've also worked to repatriate materials when we can to different countries. So and in this country, working with the Native community has been very important for us, that we do more to reach out to those communities and even preserve some of the materials that are in languages that are no longer written or have different ways of being presented. So we've made a concerted effort to reach out to the Native communities here, and also to communities that have different languages, different immigrant communities that are coming here and have been here as well. So that's a major push for us, and I'm glad that you asked that. People sometimes question us about why do you do that? And I think that's just a responsibility that we have.
Thank you. Another question
Or comment?
or comment? Yeah, this is.
Good morning, Carla. Marie-Louise is Director General of the National Library of Australia and also an accidental National Librarian. So I was going to pick up on the point that Miley has mentioned that before European arrival in Australia, there were 1,200 languages in this country. Only a small number now really actively spoken. And many of those languages were stolen and people were punished for teaching their children their language. So very much like the literacy point you made earlier. I wanted to ask you though about in times of division in society, and here in Australia it's not as extreme in the US, but we see signs of that. All sorts of parts of civil society can find that tendency to polarisation creeping into what might have previously been areas of more civil discourse. I wanted to ask you, is this an issue that you see in US libraries that are that kind of bastion of civil society and being open to all? Do you see any worrying signs that even there's crumbling around some edges?
It's interesting, it comes with sometimes in schools and in school districts. And the school libraries here have challenges because they have a local responsibility, and sometimes you have parents or caregivers that are not as open to having materials available to their children, and we have to protect other parents or caregivers' rights to allow their children to have access to materials that other ones object to. And what we're finding there, and this happened even in Baltimore, there was a push to limit access to people who did not have a permanent residence in the community. Keep those people out. They're homeless or they're not. And that has happened in other communities, that you are not making your library accessible to people who other patrons coming in would say, I don't want to sit, that person is just sitting there with 4 bags and they're not looking at materials. And why should they be here? And they don't, their hygiene is important in that. So there's been more of that in terms of limiting physical access to facilities. And that's increased as the number of people that are in libraries for that physical comfort or safety as well. So it's the materials. We just had Banned Books Week recently, and there hasn't been a significant, from what I understand, uptick in challenged materials. Harry Potter is still the most challenged series because of witchcraft. So it's a variety of ways that you see almost anxiousness about the other starting to come in. And that's where I think we have a responsibility and a role to play in exposing everyone to the other and being that place where you can discuss difficult issues, encouraging especially teenagers to express themselves. We had a national book festival where we had a poetry slam with the young people. And let me tell you, it was some pretty tough stuff about issues and how they felt about the country and all of these things. But that that also let them know that they have a voice. So it's on a number of fronts, but there is less of an uptick in terms of what materials are being challenged, but who can use a library has been challenged a little bit more.
So we have a question just in the middle here.
Hello, Carla. My name's Lauren. I work for the Australian Library and Information Association, and I run my own business, helping people preserve their history. I came from that was a big question just then, and I suppose my question's a bit more personal. When you're talking about, as the librarian for the Library of Congress, looking back, if you were to walk into that library and see yourself as a job hunter sitting there, just waiting in the library, that accidental librarian, what do you think is what could you give her as one of your main, what could you tell her about being a librarian, all your experience, the challenges that you've faced? What would be one of your takeaways that you could, give yourself some advice all the way back then?
What I would tell myself then is you are about to go on a great adventure. And the reason why you're sitting where you're sitting now is because of the way you are comfortable around books, you are comfortable in this space, and you have an opportunity to do that for so many other people. And it's interesting to think, and I did have to, and sometimes people say, what? You had to think about being the Librarian of Congress? And I did, because I knew what I was given being a librarian on the ground. I stayed in that challenged city. I still live there, 35 miles, because it brings me back to what libraries can be. And I see people, and I know what it is. And so I would say it's rejoice, and along the way get other people excited about providing that same thing that you're doing. Oh wow, this is the best thing ever to be in this place surrounded by books, and you're gonna get paid to do it. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of passionate librarians. So we've got a question from James, and then we've got some questions over there. If we can have the microphone over there as well, please.
Hi, Carla. My name is James Nicholson. I also work for the Australian Library and Information Association. I also work for the University of Queensland. And I guess my question is to do with the role of librarians as a trusted kind of individual, I guess. You talked a little bit about the draft of the Declaration of Independence, and someone saying, well, how do I know that that's real? And whilst we may have nearly fainted because it's almost, we feel it's a given, but we see leaders, and I might be political, but we see leaders in the US, but also in Australia and all over the world that are put in the very highest of positions, and they may somewhat bend the truth. I guess what I'm saying is, how can we continue to reassure the communities that we are, and are we still a truth that can be kind of relied upon, and how do we kind of, convey that, I guess?
I think we can really proudly take that mantle of being almost soldiers in the war for truth, in the sense that we are doing the best we can to be objectives, to look at sources. That's what we learn in library school. What's the best source? If you have an illness, are you going to, of course, a testimonial from somebody that uses herbs and spices and they got well, or the National Institute of Health, and we might do that. That we shouldn't step back from saying, because that's one of our values, that we don't give an answer or we qualify an answer to make sure we're being accurate, that we say that that's what we've been trained to do. And you can trust us. The fact that I'm sure you've seen the stereotypes in the commercials with librarians when they want to show on television the product is really good. They have a librarian that's in there going shush, and somebody puts gives usually a lady a stick of gum, and then she goes wild, right? And will want to buy that gum because they know that a librarian wouldn't go wild just, for any old thing. So it's an opportunity for us we have the strongest stereotype in the world, right? We're not in it for the money. We want to do that. And so we can, I think, be confident that we've been trained to do this. We are that trusted source. And in so many communities, that's what people count on. They want to go to a place and a person that doesn't seem to have any, that only wants to help you get what you need. There's a musical that's playing here in Washington, D.C. called The Music Man, and it features that stereotype, Nary the librarian. And central part of that is about trusting that librarian. So I think it's a good time for our profession to say, in this world of people questioning the motives or what is being presented in terms of information, there is a profession that for years and decades, centuries, has been there. We shouldn't shy away from it because we think, well, no.
So Ingrid?
Hi, Carla. I'm Ingrid Mason. I was once a librarian, and I've gone across to the side of technology. So I'm going to, I guess, jump a little to the keynotes yesterday. We had Genevieve Bell speaking about the future and algorithms and the biases that we see in them. And it was bookended, I hope you like the pun, by Mike Jones, talking about our legacy in the collecting world and our documentation practices with bias. And I guess I'm interested in the role that the Library of Congress has played globally in that space, but also the library community facing some of the lack of neutrality that we've had in our past.
Well, as you of course know, the Library of Congress with its classification system has had quite a history of dealing with cultural influences on how things are classified. I was part of the thing in the 70s, late 60s, from the outside, looking into the Library of Congress about the term Black, Negro, African American, all of that, what's the first term that you use in subject headings, and it's still a challenge now to just the fact that there's something called the Anglo-American cataloging rules. All of these things, so our own biases. There's another book I have to recommend, it's right behind me, and you're probably aware of it, Cruising the Library. Not what you think, it's about cataloging. But it really centers on the Library of Congress cataloging and dealing with gender issues and sexuality, how it is dealt with. And so in terms of the algorithms and what you do and what comes up first and how you search for things in what terms, we still all have a lot of work to do, and the Library of Congress is working on that.
So I think we've got one question over there, and that will be our last question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I know you've got to go somewhere as well. So
Yes, I have to meet those members of Congress, but
yeah.
I have to thank you all for giving me some inspiration and some kind of juice to go talk with the members of Congress. And I appreciate it.
Do you have time for one more question, Carla? Or you? Yeah. So was it just over there? There.
Hi Carla, Paula Kelly-Paul. I'm a board director with the Australian Library and Information Association and also manager of learning communities in Hobsons Bay, which is in Victoria. Thank you for your wonderful talk this morning. I've enjoyed it immensely. I had the privilege of visiting your beautiful library in 2010 on my Churchill Fellowship. And one of the things that really struck me was your Centre for the Book, that you had established a wonderful centre for promoting reading for young people in the Library of Congress, which I think lots of people may have been surprised. It's a wonderful centre that is promoting reading and literature. My question to you is about what role you think the Library of Congress has in early literacy, in promoting that engagement of very, very young children, between 0 and 3 in particular, where we know their brain development is at its best window ever. And we have some fantastic models that have come out of your country in the Abecedarian approach and various models like that that really focus on supporting vulnerable families around increasing the opportunity for school readiness for little people. So my question is about your role in that at the national level. If you see yourselves having one, what is that?
Well, we do, actually. We've been very fortunate to have a generous supporter who believes in the power of early literacy and the impact. In fact, this donor started at that library in Baltimore, public library, and so had that experience. The Library of Congress gives out literacy awards to literacy organizations of all types throughout this country. And recently, two that weren't in this country. And so we see that as our role for promoting basic literacy and literacy for all ages, people, adult literacy programs as well. And so that program has been expanded. We do things that from that Center for the Book is going to be expanded to a youth center. And we're working on plans for that now, where if you've been physically to the library, the ground floor will be a youth center that will promote literacy and learning and civic engagement. And so those plans for the next few months will be out publicly, and we'll be getting a lot of input on that. But we see also our role as connecting. I mentioned to you about traveling throughout this country as a national librarian, and we connect to the public libraries and school libraries. So we've been live streaming author programs throughout the country that take place here and go out, and we are actively involved with partnering with public libraries that are doing literacy programs, starting right here in our own backyard with the Washington, D.C. Public Library. We have a very good relationship with them. So we see our role as awarding and being part of that network that awards groups that are engaged in literacy programs, as well as partnering directly through our services. I have to tell you, as a person who started out as a children's librarian, I have been in our Reader Center doing story time. So about once a month, I find an opportunity. Talk about keeping you grounded. 2 and 3-year-olds, more than a budget hearing for Congress.
Absolutely. There's a few of us children's librarians in the room, I think, who are enjoying that comment. Thank you so much, and thank you for your comments. I think you've encouraged a lot of accidental and not real librarians to start wearing the badge of the new real librarian. Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
So thank you, Carla. You've been very generous with your time, and we knew you had another meeting, but we didn't realise it was with Congress. So.
No, this is very good, and I just want to thank you also. I have never heard my name said so beautifully so many times. Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, my notes kept calling you Hayden, but I thought it was better to call you Carla. So thank you. You've been very generous, and I think everyone will agree it's been a great privilege to talk with the Librarian of Congress today. So thank you very much. Thank you.